Hello and welcome to Reading Library and to this year's film for the Heritage Open Days event on its theme of Edible England. My name's Katie Amos and I'm going to take you through some items from our local studies collection illustrating something along the foodie theme. We're calling it, rather than Reading's famous 3 Bs, this is Reading's ABC. So starting with A, we've got Reading Abbey. Not obviously food related, I know, but bear with me. So this year it's the 900th anniversary of the founding of Reading Abbey by Henry I. Now what you see today is just the inner core of some of the walls. What did it used to look like? You know, it's hard to imagine with just those in front of you. So the first item we're looking at is this artist's impression by Kessie of Reading Abbey and the surrounding precinct. So as you can see, it really was quite a splendid building. Just an artist's impression, but even so, it gives a really good idea of how the Abbey would have looked in its heyday. You've got the surrounding inner gateways, you can see St Lawrence's Church, you've got the stable, which is actually the site that Reading Library is currently built on, various other things, mill, all of the surrounding area. So it gives a good idea of what you can see and how the Abbey would have looked. But what about the inside? Well, the next item we're going to look at is by Daniel Frederick Cooksey, and it's hand-drawn tiles, floor tiles, from little samples of tile found in other places that have got moved, during demolition, what have you. But he's reconstructed how the tiles would have looked, and as you'll see, there's a number of different designs, so the floor really would have been quite fabulous inside the Abbey. Moving on from there, now we get to the foodie theme. So other industries growing up around the Abbey would have been things like the mill, the brewery, a dovecot, all there to supply the Abbey and its needs. So starting with the brewery, that was set up for making beer, as the water really wasn't fit to drink back in those days, and pretty much everybody from children onwards would have drunk beer. Not the alcoholic sort of version, but a slightly lesser version. It was often known as small beer. So that's that. Moving then on to the dovecot. Now there's an existing dovecot over in Coley, and we've got a couple of pictures which show how the Reading Abbey one might have looked if it was similar to the one in Coley. And if that's the case, it would have housed around about 1,000 birds, doves and pigeons, which would have been bred for their meat and their eggs. And as a byproduct, obviously you'd have feathers, which would have been used for stuffing mattresses and pillows. Then there's the mill. As you may have seen if you've been in the library, if you look out of our staircase windows, you can actually see the remaining archway. That was built on by the Soundy family for their mill business. It was enclosed within their sort of more modern building, if you like, and only revealed when it was demolished in the 1960s, revealing the medieval archways, which have since been preserved. And the mill would have been there to grind flour to make the bread to supply the Abbey. So that's our foodie theme. And continuing from there, also within the Abbey precinct, is what is now known as Forbury Gardens. But it was a big wide open space, and from the Middle Ages onwards it was used every Michaelmas, every September, for a cheese fair. Now this was one of the principal fairs in the area, and suppliers, producers, not only from Berkshire but from a lot further afield, would come to Reading to sell their cheese. And it's been noted that in 1795 1,200 tonnes of cheese were sold, which is pretty impressive. And as well as selling cheese, there were other things going on as well. So employers and prospective employees would have been there to meet each other and gain work. There's also the pleasure side, and in 1853 you would have been able to see a giraffe in the Forbury, courtesy of Wimwell's Menagerie. They were a touring event, and they moved around and they brought lions, tigers, elephants and the giraffe to various locations across the area over the years. However, the sales of cheese and things declined, and the last fair was in 1860, and after that no more. Okay, so for the B, we've revisited the 3 Bs and we're going to cover beer and biscuits. So first of all, beer, and for that we've got the Hop Leaf Gazette, which was produced for Simonds Brewery, which later became Courage's, and they ran pubs up and down the country, and this in-house magazine looks at a large number of the businesses, the comings, the goings. There's obituaries, there's photographs, all sorts of things relating to their brewing and pub holdings. Fascinating to look through. It runs from 1926 through to 1942, I believe. Yeah, it could be really useful both for pub histories or for family history if you've got relatives who are working in that industry. And as well on the beer topic, we've got the list of licensees from 1889. It's in alphabetical order of street and shows the pubs and the beer houses, the beer shops. So whether you were drinking on the premises or off the premises, it's a whole list. So you've got the pub and the licensee listed. And if you think we've got a lot of pubs in Reading today, have a look through this, quite interesting. So moving on to Biscuits, which has to be, of course, Huntley and Palmer's. They were a huge business, started off quite small, not far from here in London Street, and moved, again, not too far from here. There's only a little snippet of the building left today, which is being used for residential purposes, but the factory was a lot bigger. And as you can see from this Ordnance Survey map from the 1930s, they even had their own railway line running in off from the Great Western Railway into the factory to enable delivery of supplies and the moving out of all their stock when it was made. So really sizable factory. And they also had their own in-house magazine, a bit like Simonds, and this one was called First Name News. Lots of snippets of interesting things. They had a massive social side, there was sports events, they've got births, marriages and deaths of their employees listed, all sorts of things. So really fascinating, in-depth stuff. And again, this one ran from the 1950s into the 1960s. Not quite such a long run as the Hot Leaf Gazette, but still nonetheless very interesting. And of course, we've got plenty of books on the topic as well. We've got a detailed description of the wedding cake for Princess Elizabeth, who of course is now our Queen and due to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee next year. Lots of information, all available here at the library on Huntley and Palmer's. So that's B. Now for C, and this is one that you might not know too much about, and it's Cox Reading sauce. Now this was invented by a fishmonger called James Cox and his wife Anne, and in 1797 they rented some premises not too far away over on Duke Street where they created their amazing fish sauce. And by 1819 the popularity was such that it was sold in around 250 shops in London alone, as well as outlets elsewhere. And you might not think of a fishmonger selling luxury food items, and certainly not in the 1800s, but that was indeed the case. As well as the Reading sauce, he sold capers, olives, Bengal curry powder, Indian soy, chilies, all sorts of things, and was a known luxury food supplier, as I say. The sort of thing you'd expect to find in a really nice delicatessen or a certain upmarket supermarket today. So yeah, interesting stuff. The sauce grew in popularity. Unfortunately, James himself died in 1827, but he had 3 sons, and of those, Charles pushed the business forward. They had other product lines as well that they created, and it gained a sort of local and national in reputation. And in fact, you can actually find Reading's sauce mentioned in a novel. Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days has the character Phineas Fogg dialing on broiled fish and Reading sauce. So he even made it into print. Unfortunately, Charles died and it passed on to his son-in-law. The business did continue, and in around about 1874 it moved into new premises just a few doors down from the library on King's Road, and it did continue along, but unfortunately it didn't quite have the longevity of, say, something like Liam Perrin's Worcestershire sauce, although they were quite similar. And unfortunately sales eventually declined, and eventually the business closed around about 1962 or so, and just sort of, fell into decline and vanished into the myths of history. However, in 2010 it was actually revived by a local restaurant, LSQ2, and did have another brief shot at fame, but has since become no more. However, we've got this amazing folder in our collection, and somebody has written down all of the history of Cox Reading sauce, which includes the recipe. I don't know that anybody would want to create it. It took quite some doing. It includes things like walnut ketchup, mushroom ketchup, anchovies, chilies, all sorts of things. The mixture was boiled, strained, stored and matured in barrels, as they discovered that it actually improved better on storage. So a bit like a fine wine or whiskey, it was actually kept in barrels for some years before being bottled and sold on. And this folder, it's got photographs, it's got maps, all sorts of things. So it's a wonderful catalogue of Cox Reading sauce. And that brings us to the end of the ABC. I hope you've enjoyed it. Just a few thank yous to Simon Smith, manager of the library, and to the other staff. Also to the Heritage Open Days team, Reading Borough Council, and of course to you. Thank you for watching. And if you've got any queries or anything, do please check out the Reading Library online catalogue. There's a whole wealth of information about everything that we have on there. So, thank you.